For the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 videos, we're going to focus mainly on observing grammatical context. We're going to observe things. I know this can get boring for people, but man, when you learn how to recognize this, it's a game changer. Okay, so we're in Mark chapter 5, verse 21. What I'm going to do is we're going to observe the grammatical context when it comes to the verbs that are being used. So this is the story about how Jesus heals a woman who was bleeding for 12 years and Jairus' daughter. And what we're going to do is read up to verse 43. And along the way, I'm going to highlight every verb that's used and how that really draws out the point of that verse, or how it really brings emphasis to something in the passage. Okay, so again, what we are going to observe, what I'm going to highlight in orange, are the verbs. I know this can get boring to people, but man, when you pay attention to these things, it brings an understanding out that can really change your life, and it has for me. Okay, so hang on tight. We're going to observe specifically the verbs that are being used. It says, when Jesus had, now forgive me if I end up being a poor grammar teacher. This is just them running on the 5th grade, education level, doing what I can with my grammar skills, but it helps. Okay, this is how I think. I hope it'll help you think. Not the way I think, but the way you're supposed to. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him. So that already brings emphasis to what is happening. Jesus has crossed to the other side of, one of the bodies of water in Israel. I don't remember which one it is. And there's crowds gathering around him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name. So there's a ruler of the synagogue who comes to a Jesus who's surrounded by crowds, just crossed over, right? So you're getting a picture of what's happening to make sense of, what God is trying to teach us. Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet. Now, you wouldn't know this because we haven't read the text prior to this, unless you have. You wouldn't know this unless you read the text before this. But there's another story right before this where Jesus actually casts demons out of a man into some pigs. And the demons actually, before they're cast out, they see Jesus, and they see him, and they fall at his feet. And that's something you'd notice in the story before, is that connection between Jairus, this authority in the synagogue, and also those spiritual rebels, those demons who recognize the authority of Jesus. Both Jairus and the demons in the previous story recognized Jesus' power. And he implored him. This is Jairus begging, pleading earnestly. Well, he's saying, my little daughter is. I know that can be like, oh, it's a big deal. No, here's why you need to know about this daughter. She's at the point of death. Okay, that's her current condition. She is in a state of at least being close to death. So what Jairus says is, hey, come. And would you just lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live? So look at the emphasis on the verbs here. When I say this, and I always told myself I'd never be this kind of a grammar teacher. I'd never be a grammar teacher at all, yet here I am. But the coming and the laying that he's requesting Jesus to do would result in this little girl being made well and living. Notice the connection between life and this Messiah, Jesus, coming and laying his hands on someone to give them life and make them well. And you know what Jesus does? He actually goes with Jairus. And a great crowd followed him. So here's that crowd that was gathering around him before. Well, now they're thronging around him, whatever that means. Like you throng around on a Saturday. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years. So just like the little girl is near to death, well, this woman has a discharge of blood that she's had for 12 years. She's bleeding out very slowly. And she had, guess what, suffered very much under many physicians. She had spent all she had, and she was no better. But actually, she grew worse. So notice how this brings attention to almost the conditions of the characters. We have Jairus, desperate, saying, would you just do this? Come with me Lay your hands on my daughter. She will be made well and she will live. Jairus is confident. And so Jesus goes with him. He went. Now a great crowd followed, thronged about him. And in that crowd, there's a woman who's had some suffering for 12 years. You know what? She's suffered so much under many physicians. She spent everything. She was no better. She actually grew worse. This gives you a picture into the condition of this woman, right? She spent everything and she's only gotten worse. Lots of suffering. She heard the reports about Jesus. And so you know what she did? She came. She came up behind him in the crowd and she touched his garment. Now Jairus is in a very similar situation. Jairus has heard about Jesus. Jairus saw Jesus and he actually desperately fell at Jesus' feet. The woman does something different. She's heard the rumors too. So she comes just like Jairus did, but she actually touches the garment of Jesus. For she said, here's what she told herself. This is the reason she touched the garments of Jesus, because she believed or told herself, if I just touch even his garments, I will be made well. Now hold on. Where did we see that before? Right up here with Jairus. If you just come with me, my daughter will be made well and she'll live. What does this woman tell herself? I will be made well if I just touch his garments. And immediately the flow of blood dried up. She felt in her body she was healed. In other words, she was made well. It was felt. Something that she could physically recognize. The blood dried up. She actually was made well, like she told herself and had faith to believe, if I just touch him and his garment. Even though I've only grown worse and spent everything and suffered for 12 years, and there's a crowd thronging and falling about Jesus, I've heard the rumors. You see how the verbs really paint this story, this action story of what's going on? It doesn't over-dramatize, but it does, in some degree, for us to imagine, it dramatizes these actions on the part of these characters. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him. So what went out from him? Power. He perceived it. Immediately, he turned, which must have been frightening. I'm sorry, you can't see this. The whole time I was highlighting. A great class this is. He turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? His disciples said. So you have this woman who touched his garment, was made well, because she believed in faith, right? She was healed. She knew it. It dried up. Jesus, at the same time, recognized power had gone out from him. So he turns and says, who touched my garments? The disciples say, you see the crowds, right? They're pressing in around you. That's probably what it means to be thronged about, right? And yet you say, who touched me? And he looked around. So now Jesus is scouring the area, really examining who was it, to see who had done it. Someone did something to Jesus. Someone touched him. And it was very recognizable. He perceived it, so much so that the power leaving him caused him to look around in order to see who did it. You can trace back all these verbs. Someone did something that made Jesus look after being touched and power having left him. That's why he turns around, because someone touched him, even though there's crowds pressing around. Now, verse 33, it says, the woman, knowing what had happened to her, something happened to her, she knew it, she came in fear, trembling, and she fell. Who else fell? Who else fell at the feet of Jesus, trembling? And came to Jesus, trembling? Jairus. And she told him, she confessed, she told the truth. She told him the whole truth. And he said, this is what Jesus says. This is how Jesus answers a trembling daughter who is fallen at his feet, told him the truth. He answers, daughter, your faith made you well. Now, what is it that made her well? Because she said, if I just touch his garment, I'll be made well. Apparently, her faith made her well. That's what Jesus says. So because you're well, you can go in peace and be healed of your disease. And you have to ask the question, why does Jesus have to affirm, almost like let her know that this is a real thing? I don't really know, but it's worth asking. So notice how this really emphasizes the story and makes it like pop off the pages. She's probably freaking out and tells him the truth. I don't know what he's going to do to me because I touched him when I was unclean and I probably made him unclean. He says, hey, your faith made you well. Go be healed, just like she believed. Now, while he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, your daughter is dead. Your nightmare happened. The thing you hoped would not happen has happened. She is currently in a condition of being dead. While Jesus is still speaking, someone comes and tells Jairus, yeah, she's dead. Right after this woman's faith healed her of her disease and made her well. Why trouble the teacher? Now, in their mind, this is troubling. Jairus, from this point on, now that his daughter is dead, this will just be troubling the teacher. So they're going, don't bother him. But overhearing, Jesus is listening the whole time. This really emphasizes the listening nature of God, to listen intently. And he knows all things. He's overhearing what they said. And Jesus says something in response to what they said. So now you have these people coming to Jairus, delivering bad news, saying one thing. Jesus is going to say something else. He says to the ruler of the synagogue, do not fear, only believe. Now, what did Jesus tell the woman that made her well? He said, your faith. In the same way, he's telling Jairus, hey, you believe, and your daughter will be made well. Do not fear. So you have two actions that Jairus can fall into. He can either believe Jesus, or he can fear because he believes more the report of those who came. And it's not that he's denying the truth. He just believes that Jesus can do something about it. Or he can choose to fear. And Jesus is saying, do not fear. We're just observing what's happening. And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Now you go, what? Does Jesus have the audacity to let people follow him and not allow others? Well, because there's a certain situation he's about to walk into, and it allows for a certain set of conditions. Certain people are going to follow him. So, guess where they go? It says they came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw. Remember, Jairus comes, sees Jesus. The woman, she comes, she saw Jesus. Well, now Jesus comes with Peter, James, and John, and Jairus, and he sees a commotion. That's not what you'd expect at a poor little girl who just passed away's home. Well, there's people weeping and wailing loudly. Notice what's happening. There's weeping and wailing. As soon as he enters, it's just absolute chaos. This paints a picture of the environment Jesus is walking into right after telling Jairus, believe. And that's probably why he only let John, James, and Peter go with him, because there's just weeping and wailing and it's madness. And when he entered, here's what he's about to change the atmosphere. Weeping, wailing, which, by the way, there were people who you would pay to wail and mourn over the loss of someone that passed away in your family. These are professional mourners. So he enters, he says, why are you making a commotion? Why are you weeping? What are they doing? They're making a commotion and weeping. Jesus enters and says something that seems to contradict the environment. The child is not dead. Well, hold on. What did they just tell Jairus? Your daughter is dead. Is Jesus lying? Were they lying? No, Jesus sees something else. It's a matter of perspective. You probably wouldn't have seen that if you didn't really highlight and hone in on the verbs here. Well, she's not dead, but she is dead. No, she's sleeping. That's a very different action. To be dead, which she actually was, Jesus, from his vantage point, says, no, she's just sleeping. Why? Because he's about to wake her up. and they laughed. How do you go from weeping, wailing, making commotion to laughing in one moment? That's what makes it sound like they're professional mourners. But he put them outside, and he took the child's father and mother and those who were with him. So Jesus is just taken over, right? You know what took over the atmosphere of this girl's house? Sorrow, doubt, fear. Jesus comes in, says something that contradicts what they see, right? He says something that causes them to laugh. He says that she's sleeping, but he puts them outside like a boss. He takes the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and guess what? If I can get this. Yeah. All right. It's good enough for you to read, right? He went in. He's going into the place of death where the child was. Well, what was she? Was she dead or was she sleeping? Taking her. Now remember, he took the parents in. Now he's taking her, the little girl, by the hand, and here's what he says. Notice there's a lot of Jesus responding to situations in this text. He says to Jairus, I'll go with you. He says to the woman, be made well. Right? He says to Jairus, have faith. Don't be afraid. He says to the people, get out. He says to them, she's sleeping. And now he says to her, Talitha kumai, which means, little girl, I say, arise. I know they said something else. I know death said something else. Jesus is saying something that is stronger and more authoritative than death. Get up. That's why she was sleeping, because he knew he was going to wake her up. And immediately the girl, she got up and she began walking. As quickly as she died, she got up and just started walking. She was 12 years of age. Who was bleeding for 12 years? The woman who touched Jesus' garment. And they were overcome with amazement. They're overtaken because she's walking around after Jesus just said, get up, even though she was dead, and he took her by the hand. He went in with authority to where the child was lying dead. And he strictly charged them, no one should know. And he told them, give her something to eat. So notice how verse 43 ends. He strictly, authoritatively, the same authority that says get out, the same authority that says get up, the same authority that says come with me and come into this room. He charged them, don't let anyone know about this. And he told them, hey, you guys give her something to eat. Let her eat, give her something, because she's arisen after he took her by the hand. It's almost like the actions draw out a certain dimension of the story that otherwise would have been missed. So when you read your Bible today, go ahead and pay attention to the verbs that are used. Almost let the verbs tell you the story. Almost let the verbs indicate, like if you were just to draw the truth out from it. I know we're not supposed to just draw truth out from one, thing, like the nouns or the verbs, put it all together for sure. But it seems to draw out a deeper meaning of the text in the narrative. Why would you give her something to eat? I don't know, something to ponder. The amazement, they're overcome, right? And he charges them, don't let anyone know. This is day number 5, all about observing verbs in the gospel narrative, okay? In day 6, we're going to continue observing. We're going to observe a couple different things, but instead of gospel narrative, we're going to jump to some wisdom literature, all right? So I'll see you guys in day number 6. Remember, pay attention to those verbs when you read the text of Scripture and see what it's really telling you and meditate on it, all right? I'll see you guys later. See you on day 6.